Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at some of the tools for observation in our continuing study of biblical interpretation. We're separated from the biblical world as we come to read the Bible by an expanse that has been likened to a wide river that separates two towns. Our town in the 21st century, if you're American like myself, then I'm from that part of the world, so there's a cultural divide as well. From the quote-unquote town, and remember there's some separations there too, because I have both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and there was a good 400 years plus of separation between their period. But we're separated, first of all, chronologically, just by the hundreds and actually 2,000 years now since the Bible was completed. And so there's a time element that separates us. There's also a cultural separation because we live in a very different culture. The things that impact us impacted them in a very different way. And so unless you've been to a different country that has a very different culture, you probably don't see that. Sometimes we think that our culture is the only way to look at things. And yet, as you travel to different countries and experience different cultures, you find out that people, they think differently. There's different things that impact them, different ways of looking at the world, different things that strike them as being important. And the Bible has that, are written by people with that kind of separation. Thirdly, there's a geographical, you're not just cultural, but there's a different part of the world. And again, if you haven't been there, it's hard for you to visualize. Now, the nice thing is that nowadays you can go on the internet, you can look at pictures, even movies of what some of those places look like, but there's still that time element that has separated the land from today. But there's that geographical separation. There's a language separation, and that's twofold because the New Testament was written in the Greek language, and yet it's written by people who probably thought primarily in Hebrew. And then the Old Testament itself is written, for the most part, except for a couple of chapters, is written in the Hebrew language. And so there's a language barrier. Now, fortunately, we have some good translations today, but still there's a language barrier, and that crosses over into that cultural. And finally, there's a covenantal separation, especially with regard to the Old Testament. They were under the Old Covenant. New Testament, we have the introduction of the New Covenant that comes and takes place, and we're in that covenant situation for today. But again, there's that separation as I read the greater part of the Scriptures. A separation that's chronological, cultural, geographical, linguistic, and finally covenantal. There are some tools that we can use that will help us span the gap. First of all, a good Bible atlas. And the one I recommend, it's actually in its third edition. It first came out in the 1970s. And it's a wonderful Bible atlas. Perhaps not the most colorful, but it contains literally hundreds of maps to take you there, as it were. And that's the Macmillan Bible Atlas. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Secondly, a good Bible dictionary. The one that I'm recommending here is the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary. If you have the additional resources, then I also recommend the Zondervan Pictorial Bible Encyclopedia. That's a 5-volume set, so you're going to be spending that much more money, but either a good Bible dictionary or a Bible encyclopedia certainly would be good tools for the trip. And then finally, a good translation. Typically, I find myself using the New American Standard Translation. The reason I use that one is because of all the translations, it's probably one of the more literal. Now, that's not always a great thing. You have translations like the New International Version, especially the the versions of it that were rendered before the year 2011 that gave sort of the general idea, but trying to put it more in today's English. The New American Standard is a little tougher to read because when you try to be consistent with one language going to another, sometimes what makes good Greek, what makes good Hebrew, just doesn't make good English. And the New American Standard wrestles with that. And yet, for doing a word-by-word, careful study of the Scriptures, I have not come yet across a better translation than the New American Standard. What I especially like about it is its attempt toward consistency when possible, and it's not always possible. When possible, it tends to try to interpret the same word, to translate the same word the same way. Now, as we're going to see, that's not always possible, but they certainly make a good attempt at that.